I'm Brian Hook. I'm an audio engineer with Oculus. Today the talk is going to be about virtual reality audio. It's an introduction to the topic. One thing I want to make clear, talk is not going to be super technical. If people want me to start getting into arguments about FFTs and things like that, that's not going to be this discussion. However, audio is super contentious. If you are audio people, if you're a sound designer, audio director type person, you probably know what I'm talking about. It is a contentious subject both between audio and non-audio people, because audio people have complained about not being respected for decades. And then audio people argue with other audio people about what they're not respected about. So we're going to try and skip a lot of that drama if possible. So virtual reality displays have progressed to the point where visual immersion and presence is possible. And so now audio technology and content have to catch up. For those of you using DK2s, for example, you know that, hey, DK2s work really well, but they have no audio at all whatsoever. So this brings us to why is audio important? Room full of audio guys, so you guys know why it's important, but specifically with VR, we want to talk about how audio enhances the perception of size, space, and distance. That enhances a big part of the whole presence thing that you hear a lot of people talking about. It enhances the perception of vection, which is the sense of motion that you get. And of course, it enhances the perception of smooth object motion. There's a big difference between seeing something move around you versus seeing something move around you and being able to also hear that audio trail going along with it. It glues a visual scene together. So if you take your scene and it looks great, but it's totally silent, that doesn't have the impact as when you actually have all the audio cues in it as well. Especially something where you're expecting a lot of noise, like crowd noise, an ocean front where you expect to hear the surf, things like that. So to make all this work, it requires spatialization and it also requires ambience. One thing I want to say is that this all does work. It works for real. Unfortunately, the state of audio demos isn't super great. We're working on that, and our intention is to have some, really cool demos in the next few months that people can check out and go, okay, now I totally get it. Some middleware providers also have demos of their own that you can check out as well. So this is where we're going to get a little bit technical. This is kind of for the non-believers about spatialization a little bit, so I'm going to do a little background about how localization and spatialization work. So all localization is our ability to identify where a sound is coming from. That's just the human ability to do that. And spatialization is sort of the inverse of that, which is if we know how humans localize a sound, now how do we synthetically fool them into thinking a sound is coming from a different location? All right, so localization is the ability to predict the position of a virtual sound source based on nothing but audio. Obviously, this is necessary for full 3D immersion. If you're in a world and it's fully 3D and there's things above you, things behind you, but everything sounds like it's on a totally flat plane, that tends to break the immersion. So with human sound localization, you only use 2 ears, yet we can localize many sounds. We get about 1 degree of resolution in front, up to about 15 degrees resolution on the sides. The amazing thing is that we're able to do this using only 2 ears, which technically isn't enough. So our brains have to infer a lot by the nature of the sounds and picking up on other cues as to the content of the sound, how the sounds arrive. And again, we're not going to get super technical. Research this stuff if you're that interested in it, because there's a lot of information about this up on the web. That is not part of the demonstration, but all right. Okay. See, but you guys know that's coming from behind you. So, totally works. All right. It's totally not planned. All right. So let's talk about how we localize sounds laterally. This depends upon the frequency. So we use what are called either inaural time differences, which is the time delay between a sound arriving from over here, so it reaches my left ear before it reaches my right ear, and level differences, which is that a sound is over here and it's a little bit louder than that same sound as it arrives over here. Which we cue on, whether or not it's ITD or ILD, is a function of the frequency to a large degree, and how that wavelength relates to the size of our heads is a big part of it. So that's lateral. So that's how we tell things left to right. Then there's elevation. So for elevation, we use what are called direction selective filters and reflections. And what that means is that our ears, our outer ear, the pinna geometry, and our head, shoulder, and torso geometry act to reflect and absorb sounds based on the different directions they're coming in. Our brains can then pick up on those cues, how that sound is impacted, and be able to tell, okay, because we're missing these frequencies, we're going to make a guess that the sound is up here somewhere or down here somewhere. Head movement helps tremendously to disambiguate. That's going to be an important thing, obviously, for VR. And then we have front to back localization. So, for example, if you look at this image right here, sound A has the same arrival times as sound B to the ears right there. So how can we tell if the sound is in front or behind? One way, as I mentioned before, is based on our outer ear geometry and by filtering out sounds. Things that are behind us tend to be a little bit more muffled than things that are coming from in front of us. In addition, we can turn our heads. By slightly turning your head, you can get in a lot more information by changing it from a front to back into making it a lateral problem. And again, obviously, head tracking is a big part of that. And then, so the human outer ear, which the pinna, collects incoming sound and also filters it. And that filtering, as I said before, is what gives us a lot of cues as to the direction it's coming from. Everybody's is a little bit different. It's a big source of discussion within the audio community as to how much of a difference that actually makes when you use it in conjunction with head tracking. So aside from that, we also have your head, shoulder, and torso. As the illustration shows, you have your shoulders bouncing sounds coming in. You have your torso, and your torso absorbs sounds coming in from below as well. And again, your brain starts to cue off of that information to make a guess as to what if a sound is below you, above you, or to the side. So using the direction selective filters, we can figure out the direction that something is coming from, but that doesn't actually tell us anything about how far away it is. So obviously a lot of people go, well, clearly that's just based on how loud it is, which is true. Loud sounds are closer, typically. Quieter sounds are farther away. But that's only true for familiar sound sources. We all know what an engine idling or a person's speech or dog barking is. So when you hear a dog barking, you can usually get an idea of how far away it is. If it's a sound that you are not familiar with, however, you may not know. If a volcano blows up, you don't know that's because it's a volcano 20 miles away blowing up, or if it's just a very loud rumble from your neighbor's garage necessarily. There's no context for you to figure out what that volume difference is actually telling you. Moving sound sources help fairly significantly because it gives you that relative loudness cue. So as the sound approaches, it gets louder. You have an idea of that scale as it changes of whether or not it is nearer or farther. We also cue on something called the initial time delay. All that is saying is the time between the initial sound arriving and then the first early reflections gives you a cue as to whether or not something is right near you or, say, close to a wall far away. If someone was standing right next to me and speaking to me directly, I would hear their voice, and then quite a bit afterwards, I would hear the reflections from their voice. If they're standing next to the wall, they might arrive at about the same time. Related to that, the mix of direct and indirect sound is also a cue that we use for distance. So again, using that example, someone standing right next to me, I'm mostly going to hear their voice, not so much the rest of the room. Someone, if they're standing far away, I may hear a lot more of the room ambiance compared to their voice. Motion parallax, if a sound is rapidly moving around you, it's probably close by. In order for a sound to be really zipping by and far away, it's going to have to be moving at an incredible rate of speed. So by and large, if we hear a sound moving very quickly across our soundscape, we're going to assume it's nearer than farther, even if it's very loud. ILD, as I mentioned before, is the interaural level difference. And all that's saying is that due to inverse square law, if there's a significant difference between the volume you hear at both ears, that means you can cue on that in terms of the distance as well. To a lesser degree, high frequency damping. Higher frequencies are absorbed by air. That's temperature and humidity dependent. However, in the real world, that does have an impact, but you have to go over pretty long distances for it to be significant. High frequency damping doesn't tend to be an issue in a typical game scenario where you're in a lot of interiors. So spatialization so we take what we've learned about localization. This is how human beings hear where a sound is coming from. Spatialization is the inverse of that. Now that we know how human beings cue on it, how can we fake out someone using headphones or something like that to think that a sound is coming from a specific spot? In the olden days, basically the pre-VR days, we used crude approximations. So for left to right, we used panning. For front to back, we'd use a low-pass filter if you even bothered. For distance, you would use volume attenuation. For elevation, you just didn't even try. And there was no head tracking. And as a result, when you only have speakers, it's pretty limited. Audio guys at the time would not try very hard to spatialize a sound because it was kind of a lost cause, because you have no idea how their speakers are configured. You don't even know where they're sitting, where they're facing. You knew none of that, so you would invest a lot more of your time in overall sound quality, environmental effects, things like that. That could give you a good return on that investment. But today we have more advanced methods of handling this. For direction, we use what are called HRTFs, which I'll talk about in the next slide. For distance, instead of just volume, we can also start using the direct reflection ratio. If you're an audio engineer who messes with reverbs a lot, it's the wet-dry mix equivalent. And now we have a big assist from head tracking as well. So HRTFs, and that's, if you're an audio person, you may be familiar with this as well. So these are your head-related transfer functions, and all this is really saying is it's trying to encode the filter characteristics for sound arriving from a specific direction. So what I was talking about earlier with localization, which is I know that a sound from up here filters a certain set of frequencies, maybe resonates certain frequencies when it's right at that location differently than over here. So what we try to do now is measure that response in a bunch of different directions so we can apply it to a sound to make it seem like that sound comes from that specific space. The interesting thing about HRTFs is that for a very long time, no one actually thought they worked. By no one, I mean everybody in academia knew they worked because it's science, but when you explain it to your layperson and you tell them, put on some headphones, and I'm gonna do this thing, and you're totally gonna believe that there's something above your head. They just kind of look at that and go, no, that's dumb because it's just headphones. Like, how does that can't work. It's just headphones. You can't play something and make it seem like it's behind me. That's not possible. But the retort to that is, okay, take off your headphones. Now how do you know something's behind you? I mean, clearly it's possible. You can do it with 2 ears. So when you think about it as, okay, I'm just putting on headphones just to play this stuff back, but I'm playing back the same responses that you're normally using yourself, then it's, okay, well, I guess, that is kind of science. And to some degree, and this is a slight tangent, back in the 90s or even the 80s, there was the binaural stuff. So a lot of people thought which were sort of related to HRTFs. I don't know if you guys have heard the things, you put on the headphones and there's a guy cutting your hair. There's like the bee flying around. It's kind of cool, but then you turn your head and, it's like the guy stuck to you and it doesn't, you look down and he's still chasing after you. It's not the same effect. With head tracking now, that makes a huge difference. Now HRTFs, which may have been a little bit marginal before, with head tracking, it suddenly makes them extremely viable. The way this data is collected, and this gets a little more technical, but I just want to kind of go over it just so people truly try to believe. So what you do is you typically put microphones inside someone's ears, and then you surround them with an array of speakers. You play a chirp or a swept sign or some other type of signal, and then you capture that data so that you can then characterize exactly how their ears and their shoulders and their torso are modifying that signal as it arrives. And obviously, if you're doing that to real people, that means you're taking sample sets from real people, which means that it's different for everybody. So there are some synthetic models you can use, the KEMAR data sets, for example. Obviously, one of the things that comes up a lot is like, well, hey, you measured these from Cindy's head. Why are they going to work with mine? Sometimes they don't. Or sometimes they kind of do, but not all the time. So there's kind of I wouldn't say an argument, but there's different schools of thought as to whether or not it's very important to have personalized HRTFs. Is it better to go somewhere, get your HRTFs measured just for you, Is it better to take a photograph of your ear and see if we can match it somehow? Or maybe you should do some kind of a quiz where you're wearing it and I was like, where do you think this sound is coming from? And you say over here, and they're like, nope, not that one. And then they try to do a best fit against 100 or 200 known good data sets. That is, I mean, clearly better HRTFs are something we want, but the nice thing is, even if you have an okay HRTF, that isn't the best, the minute you add head tracking, you have a huge amount of slop. Because if I'm sitting here and you play a sound and I think it's over here maybe, I'm not quite sure, but maybe this general vicinity, but the minute I can turn my head and just do that a little bit, that locks it in very quickly. So head tracking gives us a huge amount of tolerance for not having the best HRTF data sets in the world. So for all this to work, you really, really, really need to use headphones. They give you isolation, which is really nice for presence. You want to put on your headphones and feel like you're actually in that world. You don't want to put on your headphones and have it go through and hear the phone and hear the dog and things like that. Headphones are the ideal way of transmitting an HRTF because it's going fairly directly into your ears as opposed to picking up room noise and things like that. But of course, the big thing is that they track with your head. So if they track with your head, you can modify how you're playing things back, choose the appropriate HRTFs, and now you can have a sound playing over here, and as you turn your head, it stays there, or it stays in space, and it doesn't do this. And that makes a really significant difference. As a result, by and large, speakers are an evolutionary dead end for VR. So there are speaker systems that have great characteristics for sound reproduction, for spatialization. They may not be super practical for your average consumer. Headphones are really, really practical. So there are different types of headphones. Closed back, which are the ones most people are familiar with. They have better isolation and bass, a little bit more weight, a little bit more distortion as well. Open back headphones, which have a lot more sound leakage. If you're not familiar with open back headphones, a lot of people aren't. They're used in a lot more professional or audiophile type environments. They effectively don't have a cover back here, and so anything that's playing here is being broadcast straight out into the rest of the room. They're like little just miniature speakers. As a result, other people around you get annoyed, and you get annoyed by them. But, and I think that this is kind of an open question, they do allow for better environmental awareness. So for you guys who've seen the Crescent Bay demos, you know, you don't want to be in that T-Rex scene walking around and then just have some dude walk up and just be like, hey man, how's it going? You know, you're just going to jump. Having this actually makes people more comfortable. I know when I'm working on stuff at home, I feel way more comfortable being able to be aware of my surroundings. So when I'm working on something where I'm feeling claustrophobic or I'm a little nervous, I'm not going to jump out of my skin the minute the dog barks, this, you know, cell phone goes off, or someone walks in the room, says, how are you doing? Earbuds, great, low cost. Everybody has like 30 pairs of these sitting around because you get them with your iPod, your phones, with everything else. They, very, very poor bass, pretty much nothing under 200 hertz, but they spatialize surprisingly well because they actually have really good frequency response above that. So the nice thing is we don't spatialize things below 200 hertz particularly well, so you can put these on and actually get pretty good spatialization. Finally, there's the fancier in-ear monitors. Excellent isolation and frequency response. Minor issue, I don't know if it's significant or not, that HRTF data sets are mic'd outside the ear canal, and these are actually playing things back inside the ear canal. For me, I don't like to use in-ear monitors when I'm doing VR just because they're uncomfortable for that period of time, and you can't take them off and, you know, see what's going on. All right, so that was spatialization, and that's part of the way we're going to address audio going in the future. But related to that, and not more important or less important, but more like something that just also has to be solved as well, is handling ambience. So spatialization solves the direct sound propagation problem. So now we can hear where sound is coming from. And it's really important. You can't have the full 3D environment of all of VR and being in this huge room and then have a bird fly over the top and have it think that, and have yourself think that it's going straight across. That's not what you want. If you want immersion, you have to be able to believe that when you hear something up there, it's actually coming from up there. But that's all very dry. There's no, as you can hear in here, when I'm speaking, there is that reverberation. If you close your eyes, you have an idea of the size of this room. And that's what the ambiance provides, those indirect audio cues. You can pick up on whether or not a room is tile, if it's made out of hardwood. Is it big? Is it small? Does it have a lot of furniture? By knowing how sounds bounce through it. So, it provides indirect audio cues about a location, and for that, it needs indirect sound propagation. So it's not just the sound coming directly at you, it's the sound bouncing off the walls, bouncing off other people, bouncing off the furniture. And this is usually broken down into 3 general characteristics, which is the early reflections, which are just your basic echoes, late reverberation, which is the sound as it starts to become diffused, mixes with other sounds, and absorption. So that's when the carpet starts to absorb some of the sounds, or things like this desk does not. But all that said, spatialization is I don't want to say a mostly solved problem, but it is a problem that has known solutions. Ambiance needs a lot of improvement. There are tools, there is technology from some vendors out there that attempt to address this stuff. Some people address the reverb issue, which goes to a big degree. Other people try to address some of these future things. For example, they try to address occlusion and diffraction. There's a company called Impulsonics out of North Carolina that they're trying to have plugins that handle things like refraction and occlusion and that type of thing. Acoustic ray tracing, just the general problem of standing in this room and then how do things sound if I duck behind the podium? How do we take that into account without it just being like a total hack? Multiband reflection and absorption. Most sound libraries just tell you this absorbs 50% of the sound coming into it or 20% of the sound, but it doesn't break it down by the frequency band, which is obviously significant when you're talking about the difference between heavy carpet and a sheet of glass. All of this stuff requires engine support. It's not the kind of thing that someone can provide in a leafy, like end SDK that just takes sound sources. This requires access to your geometry, to your material systems, things like that, which is another reason why it's a difficult problem to solve, because every engine vendor kind of has to solve it on their own. The other issue is just a point of contention about the relative importance of all this stuff. Some people really, really think that occlusion is, hey, until you fix occlusion, like none of this matters. Other people think that, hey, until you get materials perfect, none of this matter. Same thing with reverb, same thing with early reflections. There's not strong agreement. So now that we know all that stuff about spatialization, the ambience, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this impacts your sound design. So the first thing is that a lot of your sounds now are going to be mono. That's so that you can place them in space. Placing a stereo sound in space is kind of a weird concept. You want your sounds to have a very wide frequency spectrum. One reason is because humans localize high frequencies better. We're not very good at hearing or identifying the location of a 100 hertz rumble. So the more high frequencies you have in a sound, the better it is for someone to hear it. A more practical reason is it masks artifacts. So a lot of this technology out there, in order to spatialize a sound, requires filtering buffers. And so you get discontinuities in the buffers, in your filters, that manifest as, I've heard ripples, I've heard clicks, distortion, warbles, a lot of different ways that you can hear these artifacts. If you have broad frequency content, kind of hides it all. And that's a good thing. The flip side of that is that you want to avoid pure tones like sine waves because you have a fundamental frequency. And so the minute you introduce a glitch, you hear that really, really very clearly against the fundamental frequency. On top of that, sine waves just aren't a really natural thing to hear in nature, but not all games and VR experiences are about reproducing things in nature. The other thing is you want to start placing your sounds exactly. That means no crotch steps or foot voices. So in the olden days, like 2 years ago, when you placed your sounds, hey, you're going to be using panning for everything. So when the narrator is speaking, you just assign it to, hey, where's that NPC going to be? Well, where are his feet? That works. Or you tie the sound, the sound source to the root node, which is right at the hips. So when you're trying to play footsteps, you're like, where's that NPC? He's right there. So you hear the footsteps coming out of his crotch. But we didn't have crotch step technology until now. So you just don't want to abuse that. So the other thing is, and again with foot voices, it's the same thing. You don't want to stand next to an NPC who starts giving you a quest, and you're like, what the hell? And they're like talking to you from down there. Those would be modern HRTF world problems or something like that. All right. So now that we have our sounds, we've made a mono, we know how they kind of work with everything. How are we going to get them into the world? So the first thing you want to avoid doing is going a little bit nuts, for those of you who are older and remember when colored lighting showed up in 3D graphics. We went from very dark, dismal worlds to very, very bright and vibrant worlds. And even the dark, dismal worlds were very red, green, or blue. You kind of don't want to overuse this stuff. So now that you have moving sound sources that you can spatialize, great. You don't want to have them just assailing the listener constantly. It's just, it's like 3D movies. It's just not everything needs to be coming at you constantly. These people are wearing headphones. They're in this immersive VR experience. It's going to be a little overwhelming. The other thing is you want to keep your sounds moving kind of slowly. That's kind of the refrain you hear a lot from the VR community. Keep it slow, keep it calm, and that's just because it reduces the number of artifacts that you're going to hear. Try to have your audio match the visuals. That's a key thing for presence. So this room is very echoey, and it matches this room. But if I was to take this kind of reverberant atmosphere and then I was standing out in a prairie, it wouldn't sound right. But the thing is, a lot of people may not even realize for the first 30 seconds or a minute, something's off. On the flip side, if you take no reverb and there's no reverberance at all, and you put someone in a sewer pipe and nothing echoes, they may not realize something just sounds a little bit off. So here's a kind of a subtler thing, which I've seen some people say is a major issue, and I think people are just going to have to experiment with this a bit, and that's the notion that static ambient sounds that are not positional can be disconcerting. And so what that means is you want to fill the soundscape. You can't have just 6 sounds that are intermittently going off, because then you sound like you're in a house in the middle of the night, and every now and then you hear a footstep or a clock tick or something like that. You want to have that nice ambient background noise to make it feel like you're in a live world. So maybe you're in a jungle, and so you're like, hey, I found this really awesome loop of jungle birds and rodents moving in the underbrush, and it's a minute-long thing. I'm just going to loop it. And I'm going to turn the volume down, and now I feel like I'm in the jungle. The problem is that you're hearing this bird up here, and as you're walking, like, that bird's like always there. And it's never, that's enough to throw off some people. Other people are just like, oh, no, it's cool. It's just like, hey, that's a different bird in the exact same spot that I was 5 minutes ago. But a lot of people are still going to be thrown off by that. Or it's the same thing rustling. Now that we have the technology and the ability to make it so that when something's rustling at your feet, that's because there's something at your feet. You don't want to fake out people into constantly thinking that something's there when it's not. Same thing with crowd noises. If you're in a football stadium and there's all this crowd noise, that's great if you're standing perfectly still. But as you walk around, you kind of expect some of the crowd noise to resolve into individual voices. If it doesn't do that, the person's not going to sit there and walk around and say, oh, wait, this isn't resolving individual voices. They're going to walk around and go, this, I'm just kind of weird feeling. And they're not even going to know what it is. They may even blame the graphics. They just may not have any idea. They're like, the tracking's off, or no one knows. Not everything needs spatialization. Anything that's in your head, narration, music, UI. Low frequency rumbles, once again, they don't spatialize very well anyway. So if it's something that's just going to be kind of shaking, a nice rumble, engine noise in a spaceship, things like that, you don't have to push it through the spatialization system. And that'll help out with your performance as well. So that brings us to the performance implications. All of this does come at a cost. It's not like stuff was discovered and it's free. You will burn CPU, which audio people are very self-conscious about. But the nice thing is VR is kind of a new way of doing things. So we're kind of getting away from like, hey, let's have everything be the maximum crazy shaders. Let's devote everything to graphics. We're still trying to keep performance up, but now people are willing to say, hey, maybe we should devote half of a core on a 16-core system or something like that, you know. We'll give you that. You guys have been there. Let's do that, and in order to get that sense of presence. So if you can get away with that, that's cool. There is some effects latency because typically a lot of these effects require buffering. You have to buffer up to a window size and then process that window. So that does incur some latency. Thankfully, we are a lot more tolerant of audio latency than we are of visual latency. On top of that, there's audio device latency, which depending on your OS or whatever, your audio device, your drivers, can be really low, like 2-3 milliseconds, or it can be really, really high, 100, we've seen 150, and that is noticeable when something's moving across your field and you hear it going and then you hear the ghost sounds chasing after it. Use your native audio formats as much as possible. If your output device or your target system is 48K, then try to convert to 48K as early as possible. Do not use runtime resampling. And then you want to, as a concession of reality, you want to prioritize your sounds for spatialization. It'd be nice to say you can spatialize 200 sounds and it'll be awesome and everything will just work, but that may not be practical. You may, depending on if you're on a mobile device, you may only be able to spatialize 8. Depends on how you're implementing it. And if that's the case, just figure out which are your 8 most important. And again, going back to what I said on the previous slide, avoid spatializing low frequency sources. They don't need to be spatialized, so just get them out of there. And this is a horrible thing to suggest, but it is a practical reality, which is allow for a 2D positioning path. So I went through all this stuff about localization and 3D spatialization, but sometimes you just need to go to pan and attenuation when your CPU is totally slammed. You've already got your top 16 sounds being spatialized, but you really need to get, the sound of a car going by laterally. At that point, if you have to switch to pan and attenuation, then that's just the reality of what you have to do. So how this relates to us as a company. So Oculus has our audio initiative, which is up until and through DK2, everything was focused on latency, displays, visual quality. Going forward, we now kind of have with the Facebook acquisition, we now have the resources to actually say, okay, we've been totally exhausted just trying to solve these basic problems, and audio would be great, but oh man, we have no bandwidth. We're starting to pick up the bandwidth now. So it has now become a first order priority to solve. We don't want to be in a position where people are ever saying something like, hey, oh yeah, Oculus, man, those HMDs are awesome, but yeah, they don't really do anything about audio. What's up with that? We want to make sure that audio is awesome both in terms of our products, but we also want audio awesome for VR. We really don't want to be at the mercy of how everybody chooses to implement their stuff. So we are going to be providing tools and technologies for developers in order to make sure that this happens. One of the first things we did was license the VisiSonics RealSpace 3D technology, which handles early reflections, spatialization, and reverberations. And I'll talk about that in a second. We're starting to do audio hardware development as well, because the grand goal is that we want baseline, high-quality VR audio available to everybody. It's necessary for the experience to actually work for people. I know this is kind of vague, but hopefully we will have more information about this coming online soon in the next couple months. So the RealSpace 3D audio technology from VisiSonics, the reason we licensed that is that it was based off of 10 years of IP development from a group out of the University of Maryland. It contributes greatly to solving some of the fundamental problems of VR audio, things I talked about, spatialization, reverberation. By licensing that technology now, it gives us a leg up to be able to focus on the harder problems that aren't being researched right now. So otherwise, we would have had to go off and kind of reinvent the wheel. So the consumer version of our HMD audio, not quite sure what we're calling that anymore, which is why it's called the consumer version of the HMD audio, but the headset we sell to consumers, The goal there is that it's going to have a guaranteed audio experience. One of the reasons audio people have not been able to, say, target headphones or even target speakers is because you can't trust the end user in terms of what they're going to have. You don't know, are they going to have headphones? Are they going to have speakers? Are they going to have a subwoofer? Are they going to have a 2.1, a 5.1, a 7.1? When they have a 5.1, are the speakers even in the right place? If they have a 2.1, are they wired backwards? You don't know if left is left and right is right even. So our goal is to at least have developers for VR who are thinking about audio go, okay, so for the consumer Rift, we know that there's going to be these headphones. We're going to have an integrated DAC as well. So that means that you're going to understand that we have our own audio device on there. So you're hopefully not going to have to be thinking in terms of supporting every different motherboard chipset and things like that. You know that this VR experience that's going to be running on our consumer headset is going to have this particular DAC. And we'll also have a microphone as well for voice over IP, so that you'll be able to count on that as well. So the goal, again, is to give you guys a nice fixed target for audio. You can mix for it. You know exactly what its capabilities are going to be. You can trust that it exists. If you know a player is going to be playing on it, this is what you're going to have. And that's a huge step up from where we were a few years ago. So the summary, audio is a fundamental part of VR immersion. Oculus is committed to providing developers with the tools and resources necessary to ensure that high quality sound is integral to the VR experience. And that is I don't want to say a big change, but it's a big step up from where we were before. And that's sort of starting now and going forward. Audio is a huge part of the VR experience for us. We want programmers, sound designers to know that that's going to be very important to us, and it's something that you guys will be able to count on as well. All right, and that is it. And we can do a Q&A now. Right. All right. So the question was, what is up with the Crescent Bay headphones? Right? Okay. So it is a prototype, and I mean, that's literally what it comes down to. There are going to be considerations for how the headphones are eventually going to be done, but clearly there's a lot of room. I mean, anybody who's used it knows it's clearly prototype. It's got the little flippy things and things like that. But I think part of the discussion is going to be weight, and part of the issue is it better to actually lock you down and make you feel like you're in that cave, or allow you to hear other people that are around you? I think we're just really at this point figuring out which is going to be the best way to approach that. Romani.
Ryan, fantastic work.
Thank you. That's the Visisonics guy. He likes us now.
I've struggled speaking many years to many people in the game space, but I think you put all the issues down.
Thank you.
I think I'm looking forward to a great, time where audio is a full participant in this whole.
I think everybody in this room has been looking forward to audio being like a significant thing. I mean, it's anybody, especially anybody who's been doing audio for like the past 15, 20 years, it's just always like, if you're an audio guy, it's, hey guys, we finally have the audio, so you've got 3 weeks to get it into the game. Could you just get that in there real quick? Oh, and it also needs to kind of like take up like 6 megs, and you get no CPU, thanks. And no matter how fast computers get, it's like you're always screwed on audio. So hopefully going forward, that will be taken care of. Dave.
Great talk.
Thank you.
I was curious, is the API for this sort of going to be the glide of VR?
Lord.
Are you guys thinking about open standards for this?
That remains to be seen. We are fairly committed to open standards. I think we're gonna announce a lot more about this, and specifically about what we're going to be doing in about the next couple months. So, I mean, I hate to be vague about it, but I mean, clearly you guys can kind of see where we're going. We're licensing technology. That's kind of the stuff that we're going to be moving forward on, so.
So the latency problem
Mm-hmm.
In the movie and broadcast industry, it's pretty well known what the latency is, but it seems like maybe in games that maybe the latency changes with the display versus the sound. Is that true or not? It seems like that would be a really big problem.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by...
Like the latency of the display.
Oh, I see. So you see something moving and then you don't quite hear it at quite the same time.
Right. Does that change? From what I've heard over the last day or so, is that is a big problem.
So in the broadcast industry, a lot of times you're talking like when you're dealing with like wireless devices and someone's on stage and then you're talking like in the hundreds of milliseconds range, right?
Well, it's usually 2 frames.
Okay.
And you watch cable and you see it's 2 frames and it's pretty well known, and then you put a 2-frame delay in the audio and it fixes it.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like it's that easy here.
It's not that easy, and that's because the latency changes depending on the device and exactly what you're doing to it. How bad it is depends largely on what the scene content's going to be. If it's a bunch of rivers and bubbling brooks and things like that, it's not too bad. The nice thing is our voice and speech animations have generally been really bad, so if the lip syncing is bad, you aren't going to notice too much. But how much of a problem it's going to be in the future when you're looking at very, very precise timings for events versus sound, that kind of remains to be seen. So, yeah.
Sort of a follow-up question to that. Is there any special considerations for sort of reproduction of human voice and spatialization of that?
The only special consideration is that human beings and our hearing is optimized for spatializing human voice. So in fact, human voice is like the ideal thing to spatialize. So it's going to be the easiest thing to spatialize, whereas like a 1500 hertz sine wave is really bad to spatialize.
It's like a reverse uncanny valley. Like eyes are really hard, and faces are really
Right.
hard, but human voice.
Yes, voice, I mean, are you dying to correct me here, Romani?
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
Quite often, human voice, because of telephone stuff,
Right.
people compress to 8K and then you lose all spatialization.
Oh, yeah.
And so you need all the high frequencies included.
Right, right. So the natural human voice is fine, but once you start to process it for voice over IP, it may start to kind of fall apart on you, which is true of a lot of the other stuff. Back there, yes, you.
You were talking about needing to decide between a more isolating an experience and a more open experience for consumer thing. Have you considered putting microphones on the outside of headphones to allow this to be adjusted?
I have not personally considered that. I have no thoughts on that. So I'm going to be super honest. I'm just thinking like come up with something super insightful and got nothing. So no, we have not thought about that, or that I'm aware of. Let me get someone in back there because I feel that I'm not in the red way back there.
Yeah, just further to the voice thing, does the new kit actually have a microphone on it?
We will be shipping with a mic. Yeah. Oh, that was an easy one. I like those. Right, lady over there, I think. Yeah, you.
I do audio for our VR films. I've got kind of shoved into that position and tried most different things. And in some ways, capturing for film is more convenient than games because we have a great way to render a realistic environment so that is actually real life. But I've tried some different things. At the moment, I'm thinking like Amazonics might be the way to go. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Maybe like supporting TV format Amazonic audio in like the player.
We have not done anything with that. Typically, for a lot of the movie type stuff, people are actually just doing straight binaural recordings. Well, I mean, you can't turn your head, which is kind of an issue, but it depends on how you define a VR movie. We've seen some flexibility in that definition. So, but we have not looked at that right now. Yeah. Okay. Did you want to share, or?
Sorry, we've done omnidirectional binaural recording.
Okay. Well, you two should totally talk. All right. So, okay. All right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get in your conversation. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, specs on the Prison Bay headphones.
I do not have the specs on that. I don't have the specs on that or the DAC right now. I don't know when we're going to be releasing those either. Presumably. I don't see them getting worse. I mean, again, it's a prototype headset, so I know there's, you know, some people, you know, griefing about that online. It's a prototype headset, so we're going to take a lot of input and we're going to be evaluating stuff, and a lot of that stuff is, you know, duct taped together right now just for, it's a trade show, so it's getting abused, and it's, yeah. Yeah. Sure. Right. So all the DAC is doing is, I mean, you have a DAC in video graphics hardware, right? So you're just taking the digital signal and you're converting it into the analog domain so that you can actually just play it back on your headphones. So all that's saying, so those probably fancier than it needed to be. All it's saying is like, hey, we're going to be the audio adapter so that you're not going to have to deal with us plugging into a headphone jack and then you trying to find us amongst the 3 different audio devices that might be present in someone's system. There's going to be our audio device in there, just so that you have some, just so that you have a known target.
So like in the future, related to kind of the you guys setting a standard for audio, you could potentially put something in the
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Would you expose it as a standard Windows
Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you in the black.
How about things like bass transducers and stuff, and feeling the sounds and stuff, the little bass?
Like
Shaders and stuff.
like sub packs and things like that. Hey, Pear, how's that sub pack? Have you tried it out? I'll be honest. We hear a lot about it online. We ordered one, and no one will try it out for me at the office that has it. But I've seen like DJs talking about it, saying it's made a huge difference.
I tried one, and subs are going into the dumpster. Once you wear a sub haptic pack, you can change it.
All right. You don't work for them, do you? All right, dude, you're all right. I expect a report. Yes, back there.
So what do you make recommendations like to localize the sound and it's not going to happen from your waist?
Right.
How do you test that? Like how do you sort of learn that?
So I mean, it depends on the middleware that you're using, and it depends on the scenes that you're constructing. So stuff like that, a lot of people actually can't tell, right? So I mean, you don't spatialize well, or the particular spatialization. It's one of those things that you end up trusting your golden ears, as it were, to make sure that they hear it. Romani was telling me a story about how they had listener-dependent early reflections, which is a really kind of a very specific thing. Most people can't hear it. An audio engineer put it on and was like, "Oh, your reflections aren't listener-dependent," And it's just one of those things. We had our audio director put on some headphones and immediately was like, "Oh, they're wired out of phase." Most of the rest of the people would have been like, "Oh, these just kind of sound like crap," and he was just like, "Nope, out of phase." Boom. Stuff like that. It's going to be kind of the same thing. So yeah. So I'm going to be a little harsh. Honestly, the demo should be us, but slammed just trying to get Crescent Bay stuff going. We're going to be releasing our own audio demos so that I'm not up here just kind of doing the hand wavy like, no, seriously, it's awesome, just trust me. Hopefully in a few months we can have people check it out and then they say, oh my God, this is like totally awesome. The audio middleware companies, no offense Romani, all their audio demos, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just, the audio companies don't have game engineers. They don't have the artists and the resources to do it. And they may very often have great technology, but then you try out their demos and they're just really bad because they're not game companies. And I think this is true of a lot of middleware companies, where middleware companies try very hard to make compelling stuff, but they're middleware companies, not compelling stuff makers. So, wait. No, you may not, Dave. You're not taking... Stop. You just... all right, hold on. I see repeats over here. Okay, yeah, you.
All right, I got sort of 2 questions, but I'll start the easy one first. What do you do with the head transfer function? So you get the way the
Yep.
You can invert that and then sort of.
That's basically all it is. You're effectively constructing a filter based on the data that you get here, and you're just taking that filter and applying it, and then boom, now all of a sudden that sound that would have just been right here is now a little late on the microphone handoff. You can pass it on. So the sound that normally would have been right here, like, okay, I'm just playing it directly panned here. Now you apply that filter, all of a sudden that sound just goes boom. And it's literally just a filter operation. That's all it is. There's nothing magical about it. It's just a filter.
You would think that by inverting that, you wouldn't. You would think that by inverting that, you would get something that you really just want the unfiltered sound going into your ear, right?
Well, so the problem is if you have the unfiltered sound going into your ear, then it depends on how you're putting it into your ear. If you take the unfiltered sound with an in-ear monitor and it's totally bypassing your outer ear, it's bypassing and going straight in your ear canal, it's going to be the unfiltered sound, and it's going to sound like it's right here. The filter is the thing that takes into account your shoulder, your torso, your ears, all that stuff.
Yeah, so it's for sounds that are not
Exactly.
originating inside the ear.
Exactly. So you have the voice and a person talking a monologue or something like that. You apply that filter, and that filter is the operation that takes it from someone being stuck in your ear to sounding like it's someone right over here. So the reason why you don't want to use speakers for this is because now you're doubling down on that, if that makes any sense. So now this filter operation took into account the original samples, ear, shoulder, and stuff, and then it's coming out of a speaker, which is then going through your shoulder and ear, and so that's the reason for that.
All right, and I don't know. The second part of my question, I don't know if I should do that, but I'm gonna do it. Okay. Have you guys thought about using? I did this weird audio propagation compute stuff. Have you thought about actually characterizing scenes using audio propagation and then sort of just finding the frequency response of each point in the room with an emitter and using that as a cache?
I mean, you're basically talking like a sampled convolution reverb type thing, or yeah, you could do that, but in order to do that and actually have positional awareness, you have to sample it everywhere, and then you have to interpolate between the spots, and so the memory, the performance, it just gets to be a little bit of a mess.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Speaking specifically, I guess it came to mind that talking into a 3D room and your voice affecting it, is that something that would be possible that you could be talking and the game would react, to process your voice, but in the virtual world? So I can understand how it would work in other people's ears. You're really showing up for flooding speakers. Yeah, basically I talk and I'm in an echoing room.
Right.
And it's I'm echoing, and that seems like one of those things where wow, I'm suddenly
That's entirely possible. I don't know because I haven't tried. They do what? So what exactly do they do? Oh, I see, the reflection of your own voice. Yeah, we haven't had a chance to experiment with that. So, but I'm sure other people have spent a lot of time doing that type of stuff. Yes.
So you mentioned, sound is tricky to do because you have materials, you have geometry, all this stuff, and it really needs to be integrated at the engine. I've seen that Epic and Unity have been very active in supporting Oculus. Is there any talk of them adding that to their engines, or is this going to be strictly Oculus as an engagement?
This is going to be us, but we hope to be cooperating with them as well. I mean, we've got strong partnerships. Audio Kinetic is a very strong partner of ours as well, and because Wise is used pretty heavily, and obviously Unity is a huge partner of ours as well. And so the nature of those exact relationships and how they, if we haven't announced anything, it's because there's nothing to announce yet. But we work closely with all of them. We encourage them to support this stuff, work with them on trying to get audio latency down, things like that. Yeah.
Is there any thoughts of moving any kind of digital signal processing to the head display itself?
All right, so the problem is that DSPs, dedicated DSPs are kind of dead. And it's just, AVX just came out and it just crushed. So even if you could go buy an off-the-shelf DSP that was close to as fast as, that did amazingly fast FFTs and, could do huge amounts of them, the cost, because there's no volume there, would be much higher than just saying, you know what, let's just use one of the cores on our new i7. DSPs are just, I mean, the only DSPs I'm aware of for like music and audio are like on high-end synthesizers, like Shark processors and things like that. And I mean, the synths cost $3,000 for a reason. That's because those DSPs are really expensive. So there's no way we're going to be able to do that. That's why, I mean, I think we're just going to be using things like AVX and AltiVec and things like that, because the bang for the buck is, I mean, it's effectively free. All right, anything else? Last one? Nothing? Okay, last one, yeah.
Does head position have any impact on how the force field interacts with sound? In other words, if I put my ear closer to my shoulder, or if I put my chin down to my chest, does that change how my force?
It does change it, but no one models it. Well, I mean, because otherwise, it's hard enough getting the sample. So you put in these little inner, so I didn't talk about this too much. The way it works for a lot of these HRTF sample sets is, I mean, it looks really, it's like a torture scene. So they put your head in like this little chin strap thing, and then they put these little microphones in here, and you have to stay still, because if you don't stay still, it kind of messes up. So then there's this array of speakers, and that starts playing stuff and then gets recorded. But if you're like sitting there and you're like, oh, hey, Steve, and then you've just screwed it up by 5 degrees, they're like, screw it, we have to do it all over again. And so the thing is, and that's just sitting, just looking straight ahead like this. So then I've seen it takes between like 45 minutes and an hour, hour and a half in order to do one subject of just doing that. And you're not even doing anything but like, you're our head model, right? Like just sit really still, don't move, don't itch. Now it's like, okay, we just spent an hour doing that. Now could you try doing that, but just tilt your head a little to the left. You know, it's just, that's not gonna happen. But I'm sure there are models that try to take that into account in a more ad hoc fashion. So, all right, so I guess that's it. Thank you very much for coming.